It began on a warm June afternoon in 2018 in the lush Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, when two American tourists disappeared without leaving a single trace. They were Ethan Moore, a young travel blogger from Texas, and his girlfriend, Sophie Landers, who had been his partner not just in life but in every adventure. What started as a romantic journey into history soon spiraled into a haunting mystery that would remain unsolved for years. The ruins they set out to explore were quiet, almost forgotten by time, a place where ancient stones seemed to whisper secrets of civilizations long gone. But those stones would soon carry another story, one of silence, fear, and unanswered questions. Disappearances are not uncommon in remote areas of Mexico, where jungles stretch endlessly and villages cling to traditions older than the country itself. Yet this case was different. These weren't careless travelers lost in the wilderness. Ethan and Sophie were careful planners, always researching destinations before they arrived. They booked reputable hotels, they shared photos with family, and they sent messages whenever possible. That last message, however, never came. Friends and relatives waited, growing restless as hours turned into days. The call for help went out, and soon the Mexican authorities launched a search through dense forest paths and overgrown ruins. Volunteers joined, helicopters hovered, and dogs tracked scents that led nowhere. 7 years later, the mystery still lingered. Until one morning, against all odds, Ethan Moore emerged alive. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his voice trembling as he described the horror he had endured. What he revealed was not simply a tale of survival, but a descent into a hidden world that few would believe, a world where fear was constant, where trust was fragile, and where hope became the only currency left to cling to. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary account of survival and tragedy, make sure you subscribe for more true survival stories from around the world. Each story uncovers not just the darkness people face, but the strength they discover in themselves when pushed beyond all imaginable limits. But to truly understand what happened to Ethan and Sophie, we must go back to the beginning, to the time before the terror began, when their journey was still filled with excitement and dreams. Ethan was always the one to chase after experiences others might avoid. He had built a modest following online by sharing photos of hidden destinations, posting travel guides, and telling stories of encounters with locals in remote corners of the world. Sophie, on the other hand, was more reserved. She didn't crave the spotlight, but loved planning the logistics, finding flights, securing permits, and making sure every trip was safe. Together, they balanced each other perfectly. Ethan's recklessness softened by Sophie's caution, Sophie's worries lifted by Ethan's optimism. When they told friends about their plan to visit lesser-known Mayan ruins near Coba, most people wished them well. Some joked about snakes, others about getting lost, but no one thought it would be dangerous. After all, millions of tourists visit the Yucatan every year. Yet the ruins they had chosen weren't the kind with ticket booths and tour buses. These were deep in the jungle, marked only by narrow dirt paths and word-of-mouth directions. Locals knew the way, but not all of them encouraged outsiders to wander there. The day before they disappeared, Ethan posted a photo on his blog. It showed a crumbling stone staircase covered in moss, trees winding their roots around the ancient structure like guardians unwilling to let go. His caption read, "Sometimes the best stories hide where no one bothers to look." That line would later haunt everyone who read it. As the sun set on that final day, villagers reported seeing a couple walking along a trail that led away from the main site. They carried small backpacks, a water jug, and a guidebook. The man had a camera slung over his shoulder. The woman looked hesitant, pausing more than once as if she wasn't sure about the path. Then, like shadows swallowed by the forest, they vanished into the green. And that was the last time anyone saw them together. Before the disappearance became international news, before Ethan's gaunt face appeared in headlines years later, they were just two ordinary Americans with extraordinary dreams. Ethan Moore and Sophie Landers lived in Austin, Texas, where their modest apartment overlooked a busy street filled with music, food trucks, and the hum of college life. To their neighbors, they seemed like any other young couple, always rushing out with backpacks, returning late with sunburned skin and stories spilling out of them. But for Ethan and Sophie, travel wasn't just recreation. It was purpose. Ethan was 32, tall with messy brown hair that never seemed to stay in place, and a restless energy that pulled him toward the unknown. He wasn't reckless in the sense of carelessness, but he had a hunger for experiences that couldn't be satisfied by routine. The best stories, he liked to say, are the ones that almost scare you. His blog had a few thousand followers, nothing compared to the giants of social media, but he cherished each comment and message. Every trip he took felt like a gift, not just for himself, but for the people reading his posts from cubicles and small towns, living vicariously through his adventures. Sophie, at 30, had a quieter strength. She worked part-time as a freelance translator, speaking fluent Spanish thanks to summers spent with her grandmother in New Mexico. Where Ethan sought thrill, Sophie sought connection, between past and present, between travelers and locals. She was meticulous in her planning, sometimes to the point of exasperating Ethan. She would spend hours double-checking routes, reading reviews and bookmarking advice from obscure travel forums. Ethan teased her about it, calling her the logistics queen, but he depended on her more than he admitted. Friends often wondered how such different personalities worked together, but those who knew them best saw the balance. Ethan pushed Sophie to embrace spontaneity. Sophie grounded Ethan when his curiosity went too far. Their love was not fiery or dramatic, but steady, like a compass needle pointing north. "As long as we're together, we'll figure it out," Sophie would say whenever obstacles arose. Ethan believed her completely. The trip to Mexico wasn't impulsive. They had talked about it for nearly a year. Ethan wanted to capture ruins most tourists ignored, the kind buried in jungle rather than showcased behind ticket booths. Sophie hesitated. She respected history too much to treat it as a backdrop for photos, and she feared the dangers of wandering too far. Yet when Ethan showed her articles about lesser-known Mayan sites near Cobar, her resistance softened. "If we're careful, if we stick together," she told him, "it could be the most meaningful trip we've ever taken." Their families had mixed reactions. Ethan's younger brother teased him, "Try not to get eaten by jaguars." Sophie's mother, more serious, asked, "Are you sure this is safe?" Sophie reassured her with that steady voice that always calmed people. "We'll be fine, Mom. We've done harder trips." Still, her mother's worried silence lingered on the phone before she finally whispered, "Promise me you'll call every day." On the morning of departure, their apartment buzzed with anticipation. Ethan shoved camera equipment into his backpack, muttering about how he needed extra batteries. Sophie folded clothes neatly into her suitcase, double-checking passports and printed confirmations. When she noticed Ethan sneaking in another lens he didn't need, she laughed. "You're going to break your back with all that gear." He grinned, slipping an arm around her waist. "Pain is temporary. Photos are forever." At the Austin airport, they sat side by side, hands entwined, while announcements echoed overhead. Sophie traced circles on Ethan's palm with her fingertip, her quiet ritual whenever she felt anxious. "We'll come back with stories no one else can tell," Ethan said, leaning closer. Sophie nodded, though her smile carried a shadow of unease. Neither of them could have known that the journey ahead would become a story, etched not in photographs or blog posts, but in the very marrow of survival. The plane took off into the morning sky, carrying them toward Mexico and toward the path that would change everything. By the time Ethan and Sophie arrived in Mexico, the air was thick with humidity and the scent of wet earth after an early summer storm. They checked into a modest hotel in Tulum, a place painted in faded turquoise with hammocks swaying lazily in the courtyard. It was the kind of stopover where travelers traded stories over cheap tequila, and the hum of cicadas filled the night. From there they planned to reach Cobar, a better-known ruin, before venturing farther into lesser-visited sites. On their second day, they wandered through a local market. Colorful stalls brimmed with hand-woven fabrics, wooden carvings of jaguars and serpents, and piles of tropical fruit. Sophie bargained for a woven bag, while Ethan snapped photos of smiling vendors and weathered walls painted with murals. It was here, among the chatter and the smoke of grilled corn, that they first heard whispers about the ruins off the tourist map. An older man selling clay figurines leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Not all ruins are for visitors," he said in Spanish, his gaze darting to make sure no one else listened. Sophie, translating quickly for Ethan, furrowed her brow. "He says some places are better left alone." Ethan tilted his head, intrigued. "Ask him why." The man shook his head. "Because people who go there don't always come back." Sophie thanked him politely and pulled Ethan away, her grip firm on his wrist. "Let's not romanticize it. It's probably dangerous terrain, not some mystery waiting for you to solve." But Ethan's curiosity had already sparked. That night, while Sophie reviewed their route on her laptop, he scrolled through obscure blogs and online forums. Several mentioned forgotten trails near Kobar, sites not marked on official maps. The posts were vague, often written in broken English, but they spoke of towering structures overtaken by vines, places where the jungle reclaimed everything. Ethan's eyes gleamed as he read. This is exactly the kind of place people want to see, untouched history. Sophie sighed, rubbing her temples. "Ethan, we planned for the main sites. I don't want us getting lost in the jungle because you followed some half-baked travel blog." The next morning they hired a local guide, Luis Herrera. He was a stocky man in his mid-40s, his face weathered from years under the sun. He met them at a cafe, sipping strong coffee as he listened to their plans. When Ethan mentioned the lesser-known ruins, Luis's eyes narrowed. "That trail is not for tourists," he said firmly. His English was halting but clear. "Dangerous. No signs, no water, no help if something happens." "We'll be careful," Ethan replied, smiling disarmingly. "We just want to see something different." Luis shook his head. "I know these places. Some are not safe. People disappear." The word hung heavy in the air. Sophie glanced at Ethan, her unease deepening. "See? Even he's saying no." But Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You've been there, haven't you? You know the way." Luis hesitated. His hands tightened around his cup, knuckles pale. For a long moment he said nothing, then muttered, "There are paths I no longer walk." He stood abruptly, leaving money on the table. "Stay with the main ruins. That is my advice." Sophie exhaled in relief. "Good. That settles it." Yet Ethan wasn't settled. That night, as cicadas droned outside their hotel window, he turned to Sophie. "We don't have to go deep, just far enough to see. If it looks bad, we'll turn back." She studied his face, torn between her instinct to refuse and her desire not to ruin his excitement. Finally she whispered, "Promise me we won't take stupid risks." "I promise," he said softly, kissing her forehead. But promises are fragile things when curiosity burns brighter than caution. As dawn broke, the couple packed lightly, their steps leading them toward a path the locals warned them never to take. The morning sun was barely up when Ethan and Sophie left their hotel with only light backpacks and a borrowed map, its edges frayed and stained with coffee rings. The air clung heavy on their skin, the kind of damp heat that made each breath feel thick. A taxi dropped them near the outskirts of Kobar, where the paved road ended, and a dirt trail curved into the jungle. The driver, an elderly man with sunken cheeks, muttered as Sophie handed him pesos. She caught enough of his Spanish to understand his warning. That path is not for tourists. She thanked him quickly, masking her unease, while Ethan adjusted the strap of his camera bag. "They all say that," he whispered, flashing her a smile. "That's how you know we're onto something special." The trail narrowed as they walked, tree branches arching overhead like ribs of a vast cathedral. The sound of the town faded behind them, replaced by the chatter of birds and the distant howl of monkeys echoing through the canopy. Insects buzzed around their arms, and the earthy scent of damp soil and rotting leaves filled the air. Sophie tightened her ponytail, swatting at mosquitoes. "This doesn't feel right, Ethan. We should have stayed at the main site." Ethan reached for her hand. "We're fine. Look around you. No tour groups, no fences. Just us and history." His voice carried both awe and stubborn determination. Hours passed as they climbed over roots and ducked beneath low-hanging vines. Sweat soaked their shirts, and their water bottles emptied faster than Sophie expected. Her unease grew with every step, but then, through a gap in the trees, she caught sight of a shadowed wall of stone. They emerged into a clearing, where the jungle revealed what it had guarded for centuries. A towering ruin half swallowed by nature. Thick vines wrapped around carved steps, roots split the walls, and moss crept over intricate glyphs etched into stone. The structure rose higher than Sophie imagined, its upper tiers nearly lost to the canopy. Ethan's breath caught. "Oh my God, do you see this? It's untouched, nobody's here." His voice shook, not from fear but from exhilaration. He rushed forward, brushing leaves from the base of the wall to reveal faded carvings. Sophie followed more cautiously, scanning the tree line. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the buzz of insects and the occasional rustle in the undergrowth. She couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. "Ethan, slow down," she urged. "This isn't like the places with guides. There could be snakes or worse." He laughed lightly, kneeling to snap photos. "Snakes don't care about tourists. Look at this craftsmanship, Sophie. People need to see this." Still, Sophie couldn't silence the knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She trailed her fingers across the cool stone, feeling the grooves of glyphs worn by centuries of rain. The walls seemed to hum with memory, as if the jungle itself disapproved of their presence. They climbed carefully up a cracked staircase, each step coated in moss that threatened to send them slipping. From the top, the view stretched across an endless green ocean of trees. For a moment, even Sophie felt a surge of wonder. "It's beautiful," she admitted softly. Ethan turned, his grin wide and boyish. "This is it. This is why we came." But as the sun began its slow descent, shadows lengthened across the clearing. The air grew heavier, the jungle sounds dimming until only the drone of insects remained. Sophie wrapped her arms around herself. "We should head back before dark." Ethan hesitated, gazing at the ruins as though he could never drink in enough of them. Yet even he sensed the shift in the atmosphere. He exhaled, slinging the camera over his shoulder. "Okay, we'll go. But tomorrow, we come back prepared." Neither of them realized that the jungle had already taken notice of their arrival, and that leaving would not be as simple as turning around. By late afternoon, Ethan and Sophie had pushed farther than they intended, their clothes clinging with sweat, their feet aching from uneven stone and tangled roots. The jungle swallowed the light quickly, its canopy turning the path into a dim tunnel long before the sun reached the horizon. Sophie checked her watch, alarm growing. "Ethan, we need to stop. We'll never make it back before dark." Ethan glanced around, reluctant. His camera still hung heavy on his shoulder, but even he knew she was right. "Fine, we'll set up here, just for the night. Then tomorrow we'll head back early." They chose a patch of ground near the base of the ruin, where the earth was flat enough for their small tent. Sophie unrolled their sleeping bags, her movements sharp and tense, while Ethan gathered sticks to make a small fire. The air grew cooler as night pressed in, but the heat of the day lingered in the ground, rising in waves beneath their tired bodies. As they ate from a pouch of trail mix and sipped the last of their water, the jungle erupted with night sounds, shrieks of unseen birds, the deep croak of frogs, and the occasional rustle that made Sophie's skin crawl. She hugged her knees to her chest. "I hate this. We don't belong out here." Ethan stretched out, gazing at the flickering firelight. "Come on. It's just nature." "This is what explorers felt centuries ago. It's incredible." "Incredible doesn't mean safe," she muttered. Silence settled between them for a while, broken only when something rustled close to the tent. Sophie stiffened, her hand gripping Ethan's arm. "Did you hear that?" He tilted his head, listening. Leaves shifted, then stilled. "Probably just a coyote or something." "They're harmless." "Harmless doesn't sound like that," she whispered, her heart pounding. Ethan rose, shining his flashlight toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dense undergrowth. Still, Sophie noticed the firelight dancing against his uneasy expression before he forced a grin. "See?" Nothing. They crawled into the tent soon after, the night heavy with tension. Sophie tried to close her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound outside seemed magnified, the crunch of leaves, the buzz of insects, the distant call of animals she couldn't name. She turned to Ethan, whispering, "Promise me we'll leave tomorrow, no more detours." He touched her hand gently. "I promise." His voice was soft but not entirely convincing. Hours passed. Sophie drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, waking with every snap of a branch. At some point she sat up, realizing their food bag, which they had left tied outside, was gone. Her stomach tightened. "Ethan, the food, it's not there." He rubbed his eyes groggily, then unzipped the tent. The rope they had used to hang the bag was still swaying gently, as if recently tugged. The ground beneath showed faint impressions in the dirt, too large to belong to any small animal. Ethan frowned, his earlier bravado faltering. Could have been monkeys. Maybe someone passing through. "Someone?" Sophie's voice cracked. "You mean people are out here?" He quickly shook his head, trying to calm her. "It's fine, could have been anything," but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt he couldn't hide. The night dragged on, endless and suffocating. Sophie lay awake, her mind racing, ears straining for the slightest sound. Ethan eventually dozed beside her, his breathing steady, but she couldn't find rest. The forest outside no longer felt like an adventure. It felt like a trap closing in. When dawn finally broke, a thin grey light filtered through the tent fabric. Sophie's exhaustion was etched in her face as she whispered, "We need to go. Today." Ethan nodded slowly, though his gaze lingered on the ruins just beyond the trees. And even as Sophie packed their things with trembling hands, he couldn't help but feel the pull of the place growing stronger, as though the jungle itself was daring them to stay. The morning after their uneasy night should have brought relief, but the jungle seemed heavier than before, as if the air itself resisted their movements. Sophie packed quickly, her hands trembling as she shoved belongings into her bag. "Let's not waste time," she urged. "The sooner we're out, the better." Ethan nodded, though his eyes kept drifting to the vine-choked staircase nearby. He longed for one last look, one more photograph, but Sophie's urgency pulled him forward. They retraced the path as best they could, but the jungle had no mercy. Trails shifted, routes disguised clearings, and every direction seemed to blur into the same wall of green. After an hour, Sophie stopped abruptly. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. "Ethan, this isn't the way. We've been circling." He tried to hide his own worry. "We'll find it, let's just keep moving." But unease deepened with each step. Their water was nearly gone, their food already stolen. Sophie's patience frayed. "You promised we'd leave. We should have never stayed the night." "I know," he admitted softly. "I'm sorry." They pressed on until exhaustion forced them to stop near a fallen log. Ethan leaned back, eyes closed, promising himself they'd regain their bearings after a short rest. Sleep crept in despite the danger. When he woke, the world felt wrong. The light had shifted, shadows long and unfamiliar. His first thought was of Sophie. He turned. Her spot was empty. The ground where she had sat was disturbed, leaves pushed aside, as though someone had been dragged or had left in a hurry. "Sophie." His voice cracked in the heavy air. He stood quickly, spinning in circles, scanning the trees. "Sophie." The jungle answered only with the shrill cries of birds. Panic surged through him. He stumbled over roots, calling her name, his throat raw from shouting. A scarf of hers lay snagged on a thorn bush a few yards away. He clutched it, heart pounding, dread filling his chest like ice. "Did you wander off?" "Sophie, answer me." He pushed deeper, crashing through undergrowth, heedless of branches tearing at his skin. Hours blurred as he searched, desperate for any trace. A footprint here, a broken twig there, clues that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The jungle swallowed everything, erasing her path as though she had never been there. By dusk, exhaustion dragged him to his knees. He pressed the scarf against his face, shaking with fear. The rational part of his mind whispered possibilities. Maybe she went looking for water, maybe she tried to backtrack. But another voice, darker, hissed that something had taken her. He collapsed near the ruins, his body trembling. Hunger gnawed at him, but fear consumed more than his stomach. Every sound in the dark became a threat. The crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs. He thought he saw movement at the edge of the clearing, a shadow slipping between trees, too tall and deliberate to be an animal. "Who's there?" he shouted hoarsely, clutching a stick like a weapon. Silence answered. The shadows didn't move again, but his skin prickled as if unseen eyes lingered. That night he barely slept, his back against the stone wall, Sophie's scarf clutched tightly in his fist. His thoughts spiraled. Had she left willingly, desperate to escape the place he had dragged her to? Or had someone, or something, taken her? By morning his throat was raw, his body weak, but one truth pressed harder than hunger or fear. Sophie was gone, and the jungle would not give her back easily. And though he tried to convince himself she was still close, the silence of the ruins whispered otherwise. Something terrible had shifted, and he was now alone in a place where vanishing seemed to be the only rule. Ethan's memory of the exact moment he was taken remained fragmented, like shards of glass scattered in the dark. He remembered shouting Sophie's name into the thick air, exhaustion pulling at his body, then the sudden weight of hands gripping him from behind. Rough cloth smothered his mouth, the sharp tang of earth filling his lungs. He fought, thrashing against unseen figures, but his strength was no match for theirs. The jungle swallowed his cries, and everything dissolved into black. When he woke, he was underground. The air was damp, heavy with mildew and sweat. Faint torchlight flickered against stone walls, revealing a narrow chamber carved deep beneath the ruins. His wrists were bound with coarse rope, his skin raw where it rubbed. The sound of dripping water echoed endlessly, mingling with the faint shuffle of footsteps in adjoining tunnels. Fear clawed at him, but confusion was stronger. "Where's Sophie?" he croaked, his throat dry. No answer came. Only the sound of the door scraping shut. The days, or what he guessed were days, bled together. He learned quickly that time lost meaning underground. Meals came sporadically, stale tortillas, beans, sometimes only water in a dented metal cup. His captors were shadows more than people, appearing silently, never speaking. He caught glimpses of them, faces obscured by cloth, eyes cold and unyielding. They moved with purpose, disciplined and wordless, as if their silence was its own language. At first Ethan fought against despair, calling out Sophie's name until his voice cracked. He scraped marks into the stone to keep track of days, but soon the lines blurred, erased by dampness or his own fading strength. Loneliness pressed harder than hunger. He clung to fragments of memory, her laugh when she caught him sneaking extra camera gear, the warmth of her hand tracing circles on his palm. The thought of her out there, maybe still alive, became both his torment and his anchor. Weeks became months. His body thinned, muscles wasting from confinement, yet he adapted. He learned the rhythm of his captor's footsteps, the sound of the metal latch before the door opened. He memorized the drip of water from a crack in the ceiling, rationing it when desperation struck. He learned silence too, realizing that speaking to himself only sharpened the ache of loneliness. Once he tried to escape. When a guard dropped the rope too loosely, Ethan lunged, striking with the desperation of a starving man. He ran barefoot down the tunnel, the stone cutting his feet, the air growing cooler as he reached what he thought was an exit. But the jungle outside was only a mirage, an opening that led to another chamber, another locked door. Hands dragged him back, blows raining down, leaving him curled on the floor, gasping. After that, he understood. Survival required patience, not reckless defiance. Over time, his senses sharpened. He heard voices now and then, muffled Spanish, fragments of orders, but never explanations. He pieced together what little he could. This was not random. Whoever held him here had a purpose, though he could not yet see it. The silence of those years became his companion. He counted breaths, studied shadows, imagined conversations with Sophie. At night he would whisper her name like a prayer, hoping it carried through stone, through earth, into whatever space she might occupy. Yet the longer he remained, the more fragile hope became. He began to wonder if she had ever been held at all, or if the jungle had taken her in a different way. That uncertainty gnawed at him more than hunger, and still, he survived. Each day he remained alive felt like both punishment and defiance, a testament to the stubborn will that refused to surrender. But deep down he knew survival alone was not enough. Without Sophie, without answers, the years were not truly lived. They were only endured. For months, Ethan had clung to the hope that Sophie was somewhere in the same labyrinth of tunnels, that if he endured long enough he might hear her voice echo through the stone. That hope kept him from breaking when his body cried out for food, when silence pressed so heavy it seemed to crush his chest. But the truth revealed itself slowly, and when it did, it came like a blade, cutting away what little strength he had left. It began with whispers, snatches of conversation in Spanish he caught when guards thought he wasn't listening. One voice mentioned la mujer, the woman, spoken in the past tense. Another time he heard laughter, sharp and cruel, as someone muttered about her escape. The words gnawed at Ethan. He begged for answers, but the faceless captors ignored him. Then one evening, as his meal was shoved through the door, something else slid across the floor, a small frayed piece of fabric. He lifted it in trembling hands. It was a scrap from Sophie's shirt, the soft blue cotton she had worn the day they left Tulum. His vision blurred as he pressed it to his face, breathing in the faintest trace of her scent, real and undeniable. The guard lingered that day, perhaps amused by his reaction. Ethan forced himself to speak, his voice cracked and low. "Where is she?" "Tell me." The man's eyes, dark and hollow, met his. For a long moment silence reigned. Then, with a smirk that chilled Ethan to the bone, he whispered, "She ran. The jungle took her." Ethan's chest constricted. His knees buckled as the guard left, the torchlight vanishing into black. He was alone again, but this time solitude came with certainty. Sophie had tried to escape. And she hadn't returned. For days he lay curled in the corner, refusing food, clutching the fabric until his knuckles ached. Grief poured through him in waves. Guilt for leading her here, anger at himself for not protecting her, despair that she had faced the horrors of the jungle alone. He replayed their last moments endlessly, her warning, her plea to leave, the shadow of worry in her eyes. He had promised her safety, yet all he had given her was ruin. At times he convinced himself she might still be alive, hidden somewhere beyond the tunnels, surviving as he had. He imagined her finding water, shelter, even allies. But each time the fantasy bloomed, it withered under the harsh weight of reality. The guards would not have spoken so casually if she had escaped completely. Their indifference carried the finality he didn't want to accept. Nights grew darker after that. Without Sophie to anchor his thoughts, his mind spiraled. He whispered apologies into the silence, his voice breaking. "I should have listened. I should have turned back." The walls gave no answer, only the slow drip of water that had become his eternal clock. And yet, even as grief consumed him, a flicker of determination remained. If Sophie had faced the jungle, then he owed it to her not to collapse in despair. He would survive, not just for himself, but because her memory demanded it. To let himself die in that underground chamber would mean surrendering everything they had been, every laugh, every shared glance, every plan whispered in the quiet of their Austin apartment. The piece of fabric became his talisman. He folded it carefully each day, holding it before sleep, whispering her name as though she might hear him beyond the veil of death. The sorrow never left, but it hardened into something else. Resolve. Sophie's fate remained a shadow, cruel and unfinished. But for Ethan, her absence became the fuel that kept his body moving, his mind alert, his will unbroken. He would carry her memory through whatever horrors lay ahead, because forgetting her was the one fate he refused to accept. For years, Ethan's world had been nothing but stone walls, flickering torches, and silence. But one night that silence broke. He awoke to muffled crying echoing through the tunnel beyond his chamber. At first, he thought it was a dream, another cruel trick of his mind. But the sound grew clearer, human, trembling, alive. The next time the guards opened his door, another figure was shoved inside. She stumbled, her wrists bound, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. Ethan froze, his heart racing. After so many years alone, seeing another captive felt like witnessing a ghost step into his world. The woman lifted her head, her dark eyes sharp despite exhaustion. She looked at him with suspicion before whispering in accented English, "You... American?" Ethan swallowed hard. His voice cracked from disuse. "Yes, my name's Ethan." She nodded faintly, her body trembling. "Carmen," she said, her Spanish accent heavy. They sat in silence at first, the weight of captivity pressing on them both. But as days turned into weeks, words began to pass between them. Carmen was 28, from a small town in the Yucatan. She had been taken years earlier, though she wasn't sure how long. "Time doesn't work here," she murmured once, staring at the dripping water on the stone wall. "It eats itself." Her story came in fragments. She had been on her way home from work when men pulled her into a truck. She never saw her family again. Her captors used her for labor, digging, carrying supplies through hidden tunnels that stretched beneath the ruins. Sometimes she overheard them speak about smuggling artifacts, selling ancient relics for profit. "They hide here," she explained. "They use the ruins as cover, and people like us, we are disposable." Ethan listened, horrified but also relieved not to be alone. Carmen was sharp, observant, and unafraid to challenge him. When despair overwhelmed him, she would hiss, "Don't let them break you. If you break, you make their job easier." Their bond deepened in the smallest ways. They shared scraps of food, divided by hand in the dark. They whispered memories of the outside world, Carmen describing her grandmother's cooking, Ethan recalling Austin's music festivals. Once, when Ethan admitted he couldn't remember the exact shade of Sophie's eyes anymore, Carmen gripped his hand. "Then remember her laugh. That doesn't fade." In her presence, Ethan rediscovered fragments of himself, long buried under years of fear. She pushed him to stay sharp, to observe their captors, to note routines and weaknesses. "You think like a tourist," she teased one night, "always looking for beauty. Stop looking at the walls and look at the cracks." He smiled for the first time in years. "Maybe you're right." Together they began to watch more closely. They noticed how food arrived at the same intervals, how guards shifted after long silences, how certain tunnels smelled of fresh air. Carmen swore one of the passages led closer to the surface. "I felt wind once," she whispered. "It's there." But beyond strategy, their bond gave Ethan something deeper. Human connection, the thing he had been starved of most. Her presence steadied him when nightmares of Sophie clawed through his sleep. Her sharp humor reminded him of resilience, even in darkness. And though grief for Sophie never left, Ethan felt something new growing alongside it, the fragile beginnings of trust, of hope, of the possibility of survival not just in body but in spirit. Still, they both knew what such hope meant. If they wanted freedom, if they wanted life beyond the tunnels, they couldn't simply wait for rescue. They would need to risk everything. And slowly, piece by piece, the two of them began to plan. The idea of escape began as a whisper, almost too fragile to speak aloud. But once Ethan and Carmen gave it voice, it became a living thing, growing stronger with each passing day. They studied their captors' movements with a quiet patience, noting when guards grew tired, when torches burned low, when footsteps grew careless. Carmen was the one who spotted the weakness first. "Every 7th night," she whispered, "they change the watch. For a short time the tunnels are emptier. If we move then we have a chance." Ethan's pulse quickened. Hope was dangerous. It sharpened and cut if mishandled, but he clung to it anyway. "If we run we don't get a second chance. Are you sure?" Her eyes hardened. "I'd rather die in the jungle than rot down here. Wouldn't you?" That conviction steadied him. Together they waited, counting meals, breaths, and the flickers of torches that marked time in their endless night. The evening finally came, cloaked in silence thicker than usual. The guard who delivered their food left the latch slightly ajar, the way he often did when rushing. Carmen's eyes met Ethan's. The signal was clear. Heart pounding, Ethan pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, but no one came. Carmen slipped out first, her movements quick and sure. Ethan followed, every step a risk, every breath a prayer. The tunnels stretched before them, damp and twisting. Carmen led with certainty, guiding them through passages she had memorized during her forced labor. "This way," she murmured. "I know the smell of air when it's clean." They hurried, though each echo of their steps seemed loud enough to betray them. Twice they froze as footsteps approached. Ethan's chest tightened as shadows flickered on the wall, but the guards passed without noticing. Finally, they reached a narrow shaft where a faint draft whispered against their skin. Ethan inhaled sharply, the first hint of freedom he had felt in years. The opening was small, half hidden by roots and stone. Carmen pushed first, clawing her way through, her nails breaking against rock. Ethan followed, scraping his shoulders raw as he forced himself upward. The shaft spat them into the night. The jungle air hit them like a wave, thick, hot, alive with the cries of unseen animals. For a moment, Ethan staggered, overwhelmed by the scent of wet earth, the sight of stars scattered like shards of light across the sky. After years underground, it felt unreal. "We need to move," Carmen urged, pulling him forward. They stumbled through dense foliage, guided by moonlight and instinct. The jungle was no friend. Thorns tore at their legs, branches whipped their faces, and unseen creatures rustled in the darkness. Their bodies, weakened from years of captivity, struggled with every step. Hours blurred as they pressed on, stopping only when their lungs screamed for rest. Ethan leaned against a tree, sweat dripping into his eyes. "We won't last long like this." "No food, no water." Carmen's jaw tightened. "We'll find a village, we have to." Their resolve was tested quickly. By midday the sun bore down mercilessly, their lips cracked from thirst, their feet blistered from uneven ground. Twice they thought they heard voices behind them, distant but too close for comfort. Fear drove them forward even when strength failed. When Ethan stumbled and fell, Carmen pulled him up, her grip fierce. "Don't stop. If you stop, you die." He nodded weakly, pushing himself on, fueled not by energy, but by sheer will. Each step carried them farther from the tunnels, yet the weight of pursuit never lifted. As the second night fell, they collapsed beneath the shelter of massive roots, gasping, trembling, alive. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to believe survival was possible. But deep down he knew the jungle was vast, merciless, and freedom itself could be as dangerous as captivity. When the jungle finally loosened its grip, Ethan and Carmen stumbled into a clearing that didn't vanish like all the others. A dirt road cut through the trees, its ruts carved by tires, not roots. For a moment, neither of them moved. They simply stood there, staring at proof that the world beyond their prison still existed. Ethan dropped to his knees, tears stinging his eyes. "We made it," he whispered, though his voice carried both triumph and disbelief. Carmen swayed beside him, her lips cracked, her skin fever-hot from exhaustion. "Not yet," she murmured. "We need people. We need help." They followed the road, dragging their feet through dust, until the distant sound of dogs barking reached their ears. The smell of wood smoke carried on the breeze. A village. The sight of the first huts, built of cinder block and tin roofs, nearly broke Ethan's will. He wanted to collapse, to surrender to the relief, but Carmen gripped his arm. "Stay standing. If we fall now, they might think we're dangerous." A woman spotted them first. She gasped, dropping the bundle of firewood in her arms. Soon others gathered, men with wary eyes, children clutching their mothers' skirts. The villagers whispered, pointing at the gaunt, dirt-covered figures before them. Finally, a man stepped forward, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Quiénes son ustedes? Who are you?" Ethan tried to speak, but his throat produced only a rasp. Carmen, though barely standing, found the strength to answer. "Somos prisioneros. Escapamos." "We are prisoners. We escaped." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The man's expression softened, and he barked orders to others. Two women hurried forward, guiding Ethan and Carmen into a shaded hut. Cool water touched Ethan's lips, and the first sip nearly made him weep. He drank greedily until his stomach cramped, then forced himself to stop. Carmen's eyes fluttered as someone pressed tortillas into her hands. Word spread quickly. By the next morning, local authorities had arrived, skeptical but alarmed. They questioned the villagers, then turned to Ethan. "You say you've been held captive? For how long?" Ethan's voice trembled as he answered in broken Spanish. "Years, 7, maybe more." The officers exchanged glances, doubt plain on their faces. One muttered, "Impossible." But when Carmen confirmed his story, adding names she had overheard, locations of tunnels she had worked in, their skepticism shifted to unease. Soon they were taken to a hospital in Mérida. Bright lights and antiseptic smells overwhelmed Ethan. After years of darkness, doctors prodded at his frail body, murmuring about malnutrition, dehydration, infections. Carmen lay in the bed beside him, silent but alive, her hand occasionally brushing his, as if to remind them both that they were still together, still real. Media interest exploded the moment word leaked. American consular officials visited, peppering Ethan with questions. What happened? Where were you held? How did you escape? His answers were halting, fragmented, as if the words themselves resisted leaving his mouth. Each question dragged him back into tunnels, shadows, the smell of mildew. At times he simply shook his head, tears burning his eyes. At night, when the hospital quieted, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Civilization had always been his anchor during captivity, an imagined place of safety and light. Yet now that he was here, he felt unmoored. Freedom was overwhelming. Noise, faces, questions. It all pressed against his fragile mind. One evening, Carmen whispered across the thin curtain separating their beds. "We're alive, Ethan. Don't let them take that from us, too." He turned his head, meeting her gaze. Alive doesn't feel like enough. Not without Sophie. Her silence was heavy, but her eyes carried a truth he already knew. Survival was only the beginning. The battle to be believed, to be understood, was waiting just beyond the hospital doors. The hospital walls had barely stopped spinning around him when the interrogations began. Detectives, journalists, and officials passed through Ethan's room like a revolving door, each carrying the same sharp questions dressed in different tones. Some voices were sympathetic, others skeptical, but all demanded the same thing, a coherent story. Detective Helena Ruiz arrived on the third day. She was sharp-eyed, her dark hair tied neatly back, her presence filling the sterile hospital room with quiet authority. She didn't waste time with introductions. "Mr. Moore," she began in steady English, "tell me exactly what happened after you disappeared in 2018. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice cracked as he began. Sophie and I went off the main trail near Koba. We thought we'd explore ruins nobody visited. Then she vanished. Men grabbed me. They kept me underground for years. I don't even know how many." Helena's pen scratched against her notepad. Her expression gave nothing away. "You say underground? Where exactly?" He shook his head. "I don't know. It was dark. Stone walls, tunnels. They fed me enough to survive. They wore masks, never spoke much. I couldn't see the outside." Helena's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. "And you expect me to believe you remained captive for 7 years and no one noticed? No other evidence? No bodies? Nothing?" Ethan's chest tightened. The disbelief in her tone stung more than he expected. "I'm standing here, aren't I? I didn't imagine it." Her voice softened slightly, though skepticism still edged it. "Trauma distorts memory, Mr. Moore. People get lost, they survive on their own, they misremember. You must understand why this sounds—" She paused, searching for the word. "Unlikely." Anger flared in him. "I didn't survive on my own. I was held. Ask Carmen. She was there too." Helena's eyes shifted toward the next room, where Carmen rested. "We will. But even with 2 stories, there must be proof." Proof. The word echoed in Ethan's skull like a curse. Proof had been stripped from him. The tunnels, the masked men, the life he'd endured, all buried beneath stone and secrecy. All he had were scars, memories, and Sophie's scarf, which the guards had stolen back long ago. When the detective left, Ethan collapsed against his pillow, trembling. Carmen slipped quietly into his room later, her steps unsteady but her voice firm. "They don't believe you, do they?" He shook his head. They think I'm broken, that I imagined it. Carmen sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. You have to keep telling it anyway, even if they doubt you. Our truth is all we have. That night a reporter was allowed inside, her camera flashing relentlessly. Ethan, can you describe your captors? What did they want from you? He blinked against the light, his words stumbling. They wanted silence. They kept us hidden. Sometimes I think they were protecting something. Smuggling artifacts, maybe. I heard things, but I can't be sure. The reporter's eyes gleamed. Do you realize how unbelievable this sounds? 7 years underground, and now you appear with no concrete evidence? Ethan's throat closed. He wanted to scream that the evidence was carved into his body, into every sleepless night and every memory of Sophie's disappearance, but the words faltered. When the room finally emptied, he whispered to himself, barely audible, Sophie, if you were here, you'd know how to make them believe. The truth weighed heavily inside him, and yet in the eyes of the world, truth without proof was just another story. And Ethan, gaunt and trembling in a hospital bed, feared that his nightmare was only beginning. Not underground, but here, in daylight, where belief was a harder cage to break. Detective Helena Ruiz returned to the hospital 2 days later, this time not with skepticism but with a thin folder clutched tightly under her arm. She waited until the room was cleared of nurses before pulling a chair beside Ethan's bed. Carmen sat quietly near the window, her posture tense but alert. Helena fixed her eyes on Ethan. We checked the area near Kobar where you claim you were taken. The jungle there is dense, but we found signs of disturbed earth, recent, not ancient, concealed tunnels partially collapsed. You may not be lying after all. Ethan felt his pulse surge. I told you, I wasn't imagining it. Helena raised a hand, tempering his hope. Finding tunnels doesn't prove everything, but Carmen's testimony gives us leads, names, places. You both overheard more than you realized. Carmen leaned forward, her voice steady despite exhaustion. They weren't just kidnappers. They moved things, boxes wrapped in cloth. I carried them sometimes, heavy, fragile. The guards spoke of buyers, foreigners. Helena nodded. Artifacts, stolen from ruins, sold on the black market. That explains the secrecy, the hidden chambers. And people like you, she exhaled sharply, were tools, disposable labor. The word sent a chill through the room. Ethan gripped the edge of his blanket. So Sophie, Helena met his eyes with controlled firmness. We don't know her fate, but we know she resisted, and resistance often meant... She let the silence finish her thought. Ethan's throat tightened, rage and grief clashing within him. Then go after them, end this. Don't let her disappear for nothing. Helena placed the folder on his bed. Inside were grainy photographs, boxes of pottery, jade figurines, fragments of carved stone recovered from a raid. Beneath them, lists of names, contacts, smugglers, middlemen. We're dismantling what we can. Your accounts are opening doors. But the network is large, international. It won't fall overnight. Carmen clenched her fists. I know one more thing. A name they trusted. Elias. He oversaw the shipments. I heard them say he was untouchable because he had police friends. Helena wrote it down without hesitation. That helps. For the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of vindication. His suffering had meaning beyond survival. If you find them, if you destroy this, maybe Sophie's story won't be forgotten. Helena's expression softened slightly, the steel in her eyes bending into empathy. Mr. Moore, sometimes justice is incomplete, but truth can still live, and you can help us tell it. Later that night, when Helena had gone, Ethan sat in silence. Carmen broke it softly. Do you feel lighter now? Knowing it wasn't all in your head? Ethan shook his head slowly. No, I feel heavier, because now I know Sophie didn't just vanish into the jungle. She was swallowed by something human, something organized, and that's harder to forgive. Carmen reached for his hand. Her grip was firm, grounding him. Then we carry it together. And we make sure they don't win. The following weeks blurred into a cycle of briefings and interviews. Federal agents asked Ethan to repeat details again and again: the smell of smoke in the tunnels, the number of guards, the sound of trucks rumbling overhead at night. Each memory pulled him back, but each retelling built a case stronger than disbelief. News outlets began reporting cautiously. Evidence of artifact smuggling ring near ancient ruins. His name was no longer followed by alleged or questioned. For the first time, people believed. Yet even with the network unraveling, Ethan felt no peace. Proof of crimes didn't bring Sophie back. And though Carmen's courage gave him strength, the hole Sophie left inside him remained as deep and dark as the tunnels themselves. Ethan's return to the United States was a blur. The plane ride from Mexico to Texas felt surreal, like he was floating between two worlds, one where he had been captive and the other a place where everything seemed too bright, too loud, and far too ordinary. The sterile, air-conditioned cabin of the plane had been a comfort after the suffocating heat of the jungle, but it also made him feel strangely untethered. He wanted to scream out, to ask if anyone else could hear the silence that clung to him. When he arrived at the Austin airport, the rush of people, the bright fluorescent lights, the announcements over the PA system, it all felt like a different life, like a memory from another person. His mother was there, standing by the gate, her arms outstretched, eyes wide with disbelief. The second she saw him, her face contorted in a mix of relief and fear. She ran to him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Ethan, Ethan, my God," she whispered, her voice cracking. He could only stand there, stunned. Her warmth was real, but it felt distant, as if it didn't belong to the same world that had held him for so long. The airport was busy, but for a moment it was as if everything around him had paused, leaving just the two of them. "I'm sorry, Mom," was all he could say. The words felt foreign, the weight of them heavier than he expected. He wasn't sure what he was apologizing for, leaving her, the years of silence, or the fact that he was back, but not truly back at all. After a few minutes they were in a car, driving through the city he had once known so well. But everything had changed. The streets felt unfamiliar. The landmarks he had grown up with seemed both comforting and strange, like something he had seen in a dream, but couldn't quite place. His mother didn't press him with questions. She didn't have to. They both knew he needed time. Time to remember what it meant to be human again. Time to breathe without fear, without looking over his shoulder. At home in the small house on the edge of the city, everything was just as he had left it, but it wasn't. His childhood room was still there, the posters on the wall, the old guitar tucked in the corner, but it didn't hold the same meaning. Nothing did. Even the food, when his mother insisted on making him a meal, felt too rich, too filling. He wasn't sure how to swallow it. Too much, too soon. That night, alone in his room, Ethan finally let himself cry. He didn't know if it was for Sophie, for the years lost, or for himself. He had finally returned to the world, but the world felt like a foreign place. The silence, the emptiness were still there, and they were worse than ever. The next few days passed in a haze. There were interviews, more questions, more probing eyes. Media outlets reached out, desperate for an exclusive, eager to paint his survival as a gripping headline, but Ethan remained silent. He didn't want to be anyone's story. He didn't want to be a symbol of resilience or triumph. Detective Helena Ruiz called a few times, asking for updates. Ethan didn't have much to offer. The smuggling ring was being dismantled, but Sophie's whereabouts remained a mystery. Still, the police were investigating every lead. The people behind the operation, the ones who had kept him locked away, were facing charges, but there was no guarantee that justice would bring Sophie back. And there were still nights when Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what he had lost. The absence of Sophie was a void that nothing seemed to fill. His mother's comforting presence, the familiar sights of Austin, none of it could bridge the distance between who he had been and who he was now. The world was moving on, but for Ethan time had stopped when he'd been trapped underground, and even though he was physically free, part of him remained chained to the past. The weeks that followed were a blur of police reports, interviews, and restless nights. Ethan's life, once filled with adventure, had been reduced to a series of fragmented memories, each one more painful than the last. His mother tried to fill the empty spaces with love, but it wasn't enough. Nothing felt complete without Sophie. Then, one afternoon, something happened that would change everything. It was an ordinary day at home, the sun dipping low outside, when a letter arrived. It was addressed to him in neat, careful handwriting, the ink smudged at the edges as though it had been written in haste. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, the contents spilling onto the table. Inside was a small notebook. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. It was Sophie's. There was no mistaking it. His heart raced as he flipped it open, the familiar scrawl of her handwriting filling the first page. The words were a message, written during her last days in captivity. Sophie had kept a journal, just as she had always done when traveling, capturing the details of their journey. But this notebook had been different. It wasn't just about the places they'd visited or the things they'd seen. It was about survival. The entries were disjointed, fragmented, as though Sophie had written them in the darkest hours of despair. She spoke of the fear she felt when she was separated from Ethan, of the desperation to escape, and the realization that the men who had taken them weren't just criminals. They were part of something much bigger, a network, operating under the radar, using the ruins as their cover for illicit dealings. One entry stopped Ethan cold. It was dated 2 weeks after they had been captured. The words were jagged, but the meaning was clear. "I don't know if anyone will ever find this, but I need to say it. I tried to escape. They know. They'll kill me before they let me go. But if someone finds this, know that Ethan wasn't the target. He never was. I was. I hope he survives this. I hope he comes back for me." The final words cut through him like a blade. He could feel Sophie's presence in every line, her love, her fear, her hope. But the most painful realization settled in his chest like a stone. She had known she might never escape. She had been prepared to die in that jungle, in the hands of those men, all while holding on to the hope that he would be free. Ethan read the words again, this time through blurred eyes. He felt the weight of her final plea, her hope for him to survive, to live on. The truth was there in every word. She had never truly believed she'd be found, but she had written the truth anyway, just in case. Sophie had left behind her legacy, and it was not only her words but the essence of who she was, brave, unwavering, and filled with love. He clutched the notebook to his chest, the tears falling freely now. It wasn't enough, nothing would ever be enough to bring her back. But Sophie had given him something vital, something he could hold on to in the face of the silence that still surrounded him. He made a promise to himself in that moment. He would never forget her. He would make sure the world knew who she was, what she had faced, and the truth she had left behind. Sophie's story, her bravery, would not be lost to the shadows. Ethan took a deep breath, the weight of the notebook still heavy in his hands. The battle wasn't over. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about honoring Sophie's memory. And he would do it, no matter how long it took, no matter the cost. The last words in Sophie's notebook burned into his mind as he closed it gently. "If you find this, promise me you'll live." And in that promise, Ethan found the strength to keep moving forward.